Hi, it's the 5th of, no, it's still the 4th of July. It's Saturday and it is 16:15 p.m. It's Natasha N.K.O reading from Brothers and Sisters. I last read chapters 10 and 11, and the last thing that was happening was the big strong black man, Humphrey Boone, who is like a big CEO somewhere, is being headhunted by the head of Angel Citibank, Preston Sinclair, the one who's got this new big vision for the bank to be more multicultural or diverse or something like this. So their last conversation, he made him an offer that he couldn't refuse, but we don't know what he's decided. Right, so chapter 12. Esther's head was bent over the papers as she held Esther's head was bent over the papers she held as she walked down the hall to the employees' lounge. A cough, hard and deliberate, forced her to look up. She turned to let the person pass and found herself confronting a smiling Tyrone, Mr. Basketball Butt. "How are you doing, Miss Jackson?" "Right on, right on." She hadn't spoken to the man since the robbery, although she'd caught him staring at her once or twice. Facing him in the otherwise empty hallway, Esther suddenly felt trapped. "Oh, you're not going to speak to me?" His Barry White boom box of a voice was tuned down low. God, what an irritating person, she thought. But even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't true. The man wasn't exactly annoying. He was just persistent as hell. "Hello, Mr. Carter, how are you?" "I'm just fine, thank you. And how is your day progressing? Did you capture any robbers yet?" Esther had to suck hard on her bottom lip to keep from smiling. "Well, I haven't seen any today, but if I do, I'll let you know." "Yes, please do that, Miss Jackson. I would just love to come to your rescue." He gave her a sly glance and a smile she ignored. Without being aware of what she was doing, she watched him go into one of the offices. Arse almighty. Damn. When Esther returned to her office, there was a sealed envelope on her desk with her name printed neatly on it. Inside was a card with an African man and woman staring into each other's eyes. She opened it and read, "Please have dinner with me this weekend." It was signed Mr. Carter. He'd actually spelled out Mr. Esther chuckled. There was a telephone number under the signature. That's what she got for smiling at him. She sighed and tossed the card into her wastepaper basket. When her prince came, he wouldn't be delivering the mail. "I think you should go out with him," Mallory said calmly that afternoon when she and Esther were eating lunch at Patty's. Esther's mouth was full of tuna fish salad. She almost choked. "You think I should what?" she managed to say. Mallory took a sip of the black coffee she always ordered with lunch. "I think you should go out with him." "Would you go out with someone like him?" Esther's breath was coming out in short, jagged spurts. "I've gone out with truckers, plumbers, unemployed actors, you name it. My only requirement is that the man I date be a jerk." She gave a cryptic smile. "Why were you looking so angry just then?" Esther ignored the question. "Give me 3 good reasons for going out with him." "Number 1, he's compassionate. That was a really nice thing he did, giving that woman money and even trying to help you out with her. I know it came off a little sexist, and maybe it was, but at least his behaviour says he's a helpful, take charge kind of guy. Number 2, he's not playing games with you. He likes you and he asked you out. Number 3, he has the best buns in town. And number 4, you're lonely, Esther. You haven't gone out with anyone since your friend fixed you up with that blind date. That was like a couple of months ago. You need to have some fun and affection. Besides, you're attracted to him, I can tell." "I am not attracted to him, and I don't see how you could suggest that I date someone who delivers mail to our office. I mean, you're Miss Politics." "I didn't say you have to go broadcast the news to everyone. Adults can be discreet. My entire relationship is built on discretion," she sighed, and her face suddenly seemed shadowed. "How are things going?" "We were supposed to go to Santa Barbara last weekend. His wife was out of town. I waited for him to pick me up on Friday night and he never showed up. Never called. Nothing. 3 seconds passed before her first tear fell. "Let's drop this," she said, wiping at her eyes. "Can't you just stop seeing him?" I have tried to stop seeing him so many times. It's ridiculous. Maybe you need some help. It's okay if you can't do it alone. Maybe there's some psychological reason that you're so attached to him. Oh, that. I'm attracted to unavailable men because my father was a cold, distant shithead. So I find men who are cold, distant shitheads and try to work out my childhood issues of abandonment. Mallory laughed. What else do you want to know? Esther shook her head. When you're ready, when you're strong enough, you'll let him go. Yeah, Mallory said softly. She took a sip of coffee. Tell me something. The truth. Whole truth. Nothing but. Why were you so angry at first when I said you ought to go out with the Western Express guy? I was surprised, that's all. No, you were angry. Would you please just tell me? I know it has something to do with my being white. Esther hesitated, then she sighed. I thought that you thought black women didn't have standards for choosing a man. That because I was black and he was black, it was a love connection, even though I'm more educated and I make more money. Mallory sighed. Look, from now on, would you tell me whenever I offend you, or if I say something racist? Their eyes met. Yes, that. Let me know, please. I want us to be friends. I've always wanted that. Okay. And give Mr. Funbuns a chance. Esther shook her head. Seriously, he isn't my type. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13. Say, Cody, what do you do when a woman you like won't go out with you? Tyrone sat on a narrow bench in front of his open locker at work. It was nearly 6 o'clock, and he and Cody Phelps had pulled their mail trucks into the company garage only a few minutes earlier. Find another woman, man. Life's too short. Stuff like that usually don't work out. Stuff like what? When you're chasing her and she's running away as hard as she can. Like I said, life's too short. Cody stepped out of his uniform and laid his navy pants across the bench. He jerked a comb through frizzy curls that were the colour of bricks. Looking at him, Tyrone wondered why he bothered to ask for his advice. Cody was still a young boy, barely 23. What could he possibly know about women, especially sisters? Ordinarily, he didn't ask other guys for personal advice, especially about women. But he had trained the fire-haired white boy when he joined the company 18 months ago, had driven around the city with him day in, day out, until he knew his route. Being cooped up with another person, with only breathing room between them, Tyrone was amazed at what they talked about, the things they confided to each other. Deep secrets, family stuff. They played a lot of chess too, and Tyrone always won. Once Cody got his own truck, they didn't see each other as much, but ever since they spent that time together, he often found himself running things by Cody. And in this case, Cody was probably right. If he was smart, he would forget about Esther Jackson. A woman like her was so into sophisticated guys, brothers with 2 and 3 degrees, doctors, lawyers, Ben's brothers. He sighed, thinking that if he'd finished college, he'd have been that kind of man. Tyrone got up abruptly. Where are you on your way to, man? Want to go get us a couple of 40s? There's a place not too far from here. Nah, maybe some other time. Tyrone took a quick look at his watch. I have to go over to the place where I order my t-shirts. There's a bazaar coming up soon, and I have to get in a supply. Man, you work harder than James Brown, Cody said, laughing a little. Tyrone watched silently as Cody put on his Lakers cap and turned the brim to the back. He put his uniform in a khaki duffel bag and stepped into some jeans that were 2 sizes too large and sagged around his waist. Tyrone couldn't help chuckling. Dude looked like Doogie Howser, the Crip. What are you laughing at? Cody asked. You, with your wannabe self. You got to be the strangest white boy on the planet. Cody flinched a little, then shrugged his shoulders. Without a trace of a smile, Cody extended his hand to Tyrone, slapped a high five, and then gave him a black power handshake that was topped off with a clenched fist. Watch out for women who play hard to get, man. That's the only kind I like. On the first Saturday in February LA, it was raining. Beneath the downpour, the city trembled, shaken by the rumblings of a new trial. The 4 white policemen were about to face another set of charges, another judge, another jury. Televisions blared old evidence, old lies, and old tapes, which rekindled flames that Los Angeles thought it had banked the year before. Each station competed with others to show the most controversial footage of the previous trial in order to position itself as the ratings winner during the upcoming one. Hate flowed throughout the city like lava. Sale signs proliferated all over town as people attempted to flee from their troubles. In schools and prisons, blacks and browns rumbled for tiny parcels of dying turf. Inmates brandished homemade knives and American-made hatred. They went for the gut and the jugular. Even after the bodies were taken away, the scent of blood was still in the air. Dainty drops filled delicate puddles just enough to rinse away the smog and chase away customers. Solid Rock Baptist Church's annual Black History Month Bazaar was officially declared a washout at 3 o'clock. Vendors grumbled over the huge canvas top that covered the church's parking lot as they parked up their food and merchandise. Tyrone was among the grim-faced merchants. Before him, spread out on a long wooden table, were piles of T-shirts, emblazoned with every Afrocentric expression known to mankind, from free at last to by any means necessary. In 8 hours, he'd sold 23 of the 500 he ordered. As he packed the boxes, the word non-returnable resounded in his head like the weary refrain of an old blues tune. He was loading the last box into the truck of his Audi when he felt a heavy hand tapping him on his back. He turned around and faced Reverend Odell Rice. The older man had been his pastor when he was younger, and his parents made him attend services. Technically, he still was his pastor, but Tyrone hadn't been to church in years. He always liked the amiable minister, and now as he approached, Tyrone smiled. Reverend Rice handed him an envelope. "What's this?" Tyrone asked. "Under the circumstances, we're returning your vendor's fee," the minister said. "We had good publicity. The weather just didn't cooperate. I'm sorry for any inconvenience. We're planning on having an African family reunion at the end of the summer. I hope we can get you to come back, Tyrone." "I'll come back if you buy a T-shirt, Rev. This is just your size." He pulled out a bright gold one that read, "Yes, I've been blessed. Regular $10. I'll give it to you for $8. The minister grinned, then reached into his back pocket and pulled out a $5 bill and 3 faded ones. "You know, you always were a little hustler. Wasn't it you who sold candy bars on the bus that time the Sunday school took a trip to the desert?" "Yeah, that was me." The minister chuckled. "I mean, you waited until we got good and hungry, then whipped out those candy bars and jacked up the prices." He shook his head. He peered into Tyrone's face. "I sure would like to see you sitting up in church one Sunday." Tyrone looked down at his shoes. "Well, I'll have to arrange that. If there's anything I can do for you, or if you ever need to talk to someone, you just come to see me, Tyrone." There were so many young brothers with potential, Reverend Rice thought. He saw a spark in Tyrone's eyes. "A salesman like you ought to have his own store." "Well, I'm working on that, Rev," Tyrone said, passing him the T-shirt. For a moment, he saw himself enrolled in college, taking business courses, but then the moment passed, so did his vision. The minister's eyes brightened with interest. "That a fact? Well, I'm working on it too. You come see me when you're ready to get that store. Maybe I can do something for you." Tyrone mumbled something as he left. The truth was, he'd never even thought about owning a store. Oh, maybe he'd imagined what it might be like, but he never really sat down and gave the idea serious contemplation. He wasn't thinking about it now. What was on his mind was the fact that the merchandise was non-returnable and billable in 30 days. As Tyrone cruised down Cranston, he looked for a likely corner to set up shop, which is what he always did when the bazaars and other vending events didn't pan out. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and wet. He hated selling on corners. He had to keep one eye out for customers and the other out for cops. There was a Muslim hawking newspapers and bean pies in front of the huge liquor store located across the street from the billboard with a crack baby, and he decided against sharing the spot. 1, because cops were always drawn to liquor stores, and 2, because he couldn't stand looking up and seeing that puny, wasted baby. Instead, he chose a corner 2 blocks to the north, directly in front of the mall. Pulling onto a side street, he parked his car. Then on Cranston, he set up a card table with a kente cloth cover. He put the shirts on it and opened a folding chair. Next to his display, he placed a carefully printed sign that said, "Below rock bottom prices," in huge red block letters. He could feel the hustling spirit begin to take him over the moment he sat down. His soul was singing the salesman's song. Sell, sell, sell. The adrenaline was pumping through his veins. Come on and get a bargain. Who's looking for a bargain? He called out to the passerby. 3 women were walking toward him. Come on and make these t-shirts happy, ladies. You know this cotton wants to get next to your skin. The women giggled and stepped over to the table to look. Each of them bought a t-shirt. Thank you, ladies, Tyrone called out as the women left. He looked up and down the street, searching for customers, like an old-fashioned huckster. He delivered a custom-fit, rapid-fire sales pitch whenever anyone came near. More often than not, the person ended up buying a shirt. He stayed on the corner for several hours until the bean pie man had disappeared and the streetlights came on. Reluctantly, he boxed up his goods and packed them into his car, wishing the daylight had lasted a little longer. 38 shirts. Not bad for less than 2 hours' work, but that still left him with more than 400 non-returnable items. He'd have to check around and see if any events for vendors were coming up anywhere in the city. His apartment was less than a mile away, in a section just east of Park Crest, a neighbourhood of neatly clipped lawns, 2-bedroom bungalows and well-kept duplexes. By the time he lugged in the boxes to his second-floor apartment, Tyrone was tired and sore. He took off his clothes, leaving them right in the middle of the bathroom floor, ran a hot bath, dumped in half a box of Epsom salts, and then sat down in the steamy tub. He stretched out as far as his lanky body could go and finally felt his legs go limp. He soaked for at least 30 minutes. When he got out, he turned on the radio to KJLH and fell asleep listening to Sade's sultry crooning. He was awakened nearly 2 hours later by the ringing of the telephone. His friend James's harsh voice blared in his ear like a car alarm. Party time, party time. Huh? Tyrone said groggily. Wake your black ass up, James yelled into the phone, and get over here. There are some fine women waiting for you. The bed felt wonderful, he thought after he hung up the phone. His shoulders were tired from lifting boxes. He really didn't feel like driving all the way out to Carson for a house party. But it would be good to see his friends and have a few beers. Maybe he'd get lucky and sell some shirts. The first person he saw when he stepped inside the house was his ex-girlfriend Sylvia. She looked fine as usual, but she was the last person in the world he wanted to see. Not because they'd parted under a cloud of acrimony, but simply because they didn't seem able to stop trying to patch up what needed to stay broken. Yo-yo love. He didn't want to get started all over again. As he was looking at her, she turned around and saw him. She jerked her head a little, the way she did whenever she was startled, and then gave him a little wave. As soon as she looked away, he eased into the kitchen. There was a bid whist game going on. His friend James was standing over the players. Ah, shit. Here comes Willie Loman. Here come Willie Yeoman, y'all. I mean Bew Willie Loman. What you got in the bag, man? James called out. He was leaning against the refrigerator, a Corona with a twist in one hand. He held a woman's shoulder in his other. No. He held a woman's hand in his other. You better not be bringing anything in here to sell. I know that. Tyrone started laughing. James shook his head. Nah, man. Take that mess right back to your car. James turned to the people in the kitchen. This Negro can't even come to a party without bringing something to sell. Need to call you Tyrone Avon Carter. What you got in that bag, you goddamn money grabber? Mind if I make myself comfortable, Tyrone said, moving the salt and pepper shakers from a nearby counter. He spread his kente cloth over the space, then set the t-shirts out in 2 orderly rows. Next to them he placed his sign, below rock bottom prices. Ain't this some shit? I know you're giving the house 10%, I know that. Gotta give the house a cut, Tyrone said. Well, what are you waiting for? Get your wallets out, James said. Tyrone stayed in the kitchen for at least an hour. A small woman with long fingernails and big hips started giving him the eye after she abandoned the whist players. Tyrone began giving it right back to her. She's cute, he thought, looking at her hips. You see anything on my table you like? He asked casually. I see something behind your table I like, she said, and then licked her lips, slowly. Hello. N.K.O was a good dancer, and on the fast numbers they really clicked. But when Babyface started crooning his slow, lovesick melodies, they couldn't get the rhythm together. He stepped left and she stepped right. They bruised each other for about 3 numbers, and then he led her off the dance floor and back into the kitchen. The air was spicy with the odour of barbecue and potato salad. She talked a lot, mostly about her class of 3rd graders. There were 35 kids in her room, and after an hour had passed, Tyrone felt he knew each one intimately. When people came in to buy a shirt, he was happy for the interruption, but the woman stayed right beside him, wouldn't budge. Mr. T-shirt strikes again. He looked up and Sylvia was smiling at him. He was almost glad to see her. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Nicole press her lips together tightly and move closer to him. "Oh, Sylvia, do you know Nicole?" Sylvia's eyes widened and her upper lip wrinkled just a fraction of an inch. "She's pissed off," he thought. "Nice to meet you," she said icily. "Nice to meet you too," Nicole said. The three of them made the smallest of small talk, while the two women glared alternately at each other and at him. Tyrone felt as if two gigantic boulders were pressing against him. Finally, Sylvia said, "May I speak with you privately, Tyrone?" Her voice was loaded with malice. She had barely pulled him out the kitchen door before she was hissing and snarling. "Is she the reason we broke up?" "Sylvia, I just met the woman." "Right. Look, if this is all you want to talk about, we're not going to have a conversation." The light from the kitchen illuminated Sylvia's perfectly round and very hostile face. The tear that rolled down her cheek seemed almost electric, but he was used to her tears and other let's start over tricks. "Sylvia," he said wearily, "we ain't doing this. We're not good for each other. We ain't going to be together, and I'm going back inside." Before he could cross the kitchen threshold, another woman was by his side. He looked down and saw grape-coloured skin, long legs, her hair like thick ropes. She put her hand on his arm. "You feel like dancing?" Her heavy breasts seemed to move whenever she spoke. They sang a siren song, those breasts did. Tyrone looked away. "I think I'll sit this one out, sweetheart." He was ready to leave. He collected the remaining shirts on the table. He'd sold 12, folded up his kente cloth and put everything in 2 plastic bags. "James," he said, when he found his friend on the dance floor, "I'm out of here." He placed $12 in his friend's hand. "Don't spend it all in one place." "Peace, my brother," James said, tucking the money into his pocket. As he crossed to the front door, a thin, buck-toothed woman reached out and touched his arm. "Hey, don't I know you from?" He shook his head almost violently and continued his trek to the door. Tyrone didn't feel truly safe until he was in the car. The in-town bar was crowded, and Esther made several attempts before she caught the bartender's eye to order her second glass of white wine. She twisted the ruby and diamond ring on her finger around and around. The ring had been a college graduation present from her parents. She played with it when she was nervous. She glanced at her watch. She'd been waiting for Vanessa for exactly 30 minutes. The bartender handed her the wine, and Esther extended a $5 bill, but he shook his head. The gentleman sent it with his compliments, he said, indicating her benefactor with a nod of his head. Esther followed the motion and found herself regarding a man across the room who could only be described as a clone of Quasimodo. She said hastily, "Oh, well, tell the gentleman thanks, but I'm meeting someone." She pressed the money into his hand. The bartender nodded. "Hey, Mama, you sure are looking mighty good." Her seatmate, a small, greasy man, smiled at her, revealing not one, but 2 gold teeth. "How are you?" she said weakly, looking around for another seat. There were none. Esther had a sudden gasping sensation, as if she couldn't catch her breath. "Fine thing like you out by herself? This must be my lucky night." The gold was blinding her. "No," Esther said quickly, panting a little. "I'm meeting someone any minute now. Any minute. Soon. Very soon." She looked around the room in a distracted, almost hysterical manner. The man nodded, and a slight spritz of Jericho juice sprayed over her. Everywhere she turned, men were smiling and winking at her. One blew her a kiss. "I will stare into this glass of wine until they come," she told herself. She breathed slowly. "Esther!" Vanessa was making her way toward the bar. She was wearing pants, Esther thought, but the green, pink and purple outfit was so loose and chiffony that she really couldn't tell what her friend had on. She smiled, waiting for the dates to appear until she realized that she was looking at them. Standing next to Vanessa were 2 fine men, tall, muscular and impeccably dressed. And white. Esther barely heard the introductions. She was conscious enough to nod her head, stick out her right hand and smile. Around the bar, the same men who'd been looking at her with naked desire now gave her contemptuous glances. At her suggestion, the 2 couples moved to a table near the rear. Drinks arrived and they began chatting. When she thought enough time had passed so that she couldn't be considered rude, Esther said, "Vanessa, I need to go to the restroom. Would you come with me?" The door to the ladies' room had barely closed when Esther said to Vanessa, "Why did you bring them? You know I don't date white men." "You know what? You got too many rules. You don't date poor men. You don't date white men. You must want to be alone." "Relax, it's not a date," Vanessa said simply. "What do you mean it's not a date? We're at a club, we're having drinks. Let me put it this way. They're having a date. We are not having a date." Esther looked at her blankly. "Work with me, people," Vanessa said. Esther made a small noise, a fraction of a scream. "They're having a date. With each other, relax. They can dance their asses off anyway," she said, sighing. "I didn't get the part. I'm not going to be Denzel's woman. Bobby and Paul are fellow actors and they're just trying to cheer me up. We did a show together." "Oh, I'm sorry, sweetie." Esther actually did feel disappointed. Vanessa gave her a look of the gravest incredulity. "Don't worry about it. I'm up for another part. I'm going to play Eddie's woman. I know I'm going to get this one." Esther stared at Vanessa without speaking. Paul and Bob stood up when they returned to the table. "Now let me get your name straight," Esther said, determined to be personable for Vanessa's sake. "I'm Bob Capuletti and he's Paul Petruccelli," Bob said quickly. "Are you guys from Los Angeles?" They didn't really look gay, Esther thought to herself. "Nah, we're just a couple of Italian guys from Brooklyn," Paul said. "But don't worry, we're not in the mafia. We have no ties to the Gambino or the Gotti family." He stood up. "Excuse me, I left something in the men's room." "Behind the toilet," Bob whispered, in a perfect imitation of Don Corleone. Vanessa was laughing before Esther realised that the men were doing a parody of The Godfather. She started chuckling too. Bob and Paul were a comedic tag team. As soon as one ended a funny story, the other began one. The two men regaled the woman with tales about life in the industry, and after a while, Esther was laughing too hard to feel uncomfortable. When the fast song came on, they all got up and danced. Paul and Bobby were good dancers, and the four of them stayed out on the floor for almost an hour. When a slow song came on, the two couples returned to their table and ordered another round of drinks. "Well, if it isn't Miss Jackson!" Esther looked up into the smiling, slightly mocking face of Tyrone Carter. "Oh, Mr. Tyrone Carter," he said easily. She laughed in spite of herself. "Yes, of course, Tyrone. I'd like you to meet Vanessa, Bob, and Paul." Vanessa smiled and nodded. The men shook hands. "Do either of you gentlemen mind if I steal me a quick dance with Miss Jackson?" Tyrone asked. Vanessa's arched eyebrows rose just slightly. Esther looked surprised. We'll be watching," Paul said. Tyrone led her to an open space on a crowded floor. They found their rhythm easily and began swaying in synchronized rocking. Not too fast, not too slow. "So," Tyrone finally said, when the song was just about half over, "I see that you really are busy on Saturday nights." Here it comes, she thought. But Tyrone only smiled, and when the song ended and was quickly followed by a slow number, he wrapped his large fingers around her wrists and gently pulled her toward him. Esther slid easily into his arms. His neck smelled soapy and fresh. So, did you come with them? "No, I met them here. I drove." She has the prettiest eyes, he thought. For a minute, he remembered Cody's advice. What did that fool know? Go for it, he told himself. "Well, if you'd like to reconnect with your culture this evening, get in touch with your roots. I'm getting ready to roll over to Rick's over in Wilshire. Why don't you meet me there in 30 minutes? Esther didn't say anything. He is pleasant, she thought. He's nice looking. He's sane. He's the postman, she reminded herself. "I don't think so," she said. Tyrone walked Esther back to her table. He nodded toward her friends. "Thank you. Good meeting everyone. Oh, before I leave you, good people, may I interest you in a t-shirt?" He pulled 2 shirts from a plastic bag and held them against his chest. One said, "It's a black thing you wouldn't understand." The other had the infamous picture of Malcolm X holding a rifle and looking out the window, and it read, "By any means necessary." "What do you think, Bob?" Paul asked. "It's a black thing," Bob read. "Oh, I've got to have one. I can't wait to stroll into stage with that on." Tyrone smiled as he accepted the money and handed Bob the shirt. "Good night." To Esther he said, "I hope to see you again soon." So who was that? Vanessa kept her eyes on the man as he walked away. Paul and Bob's heads were turned too. He's the Western Express man. He delivers mail to my office. How can I get on his route? Vanessa said with a sly laugh. Just kidding, girlfriend. Esther gave a little sniff. I barely know him, and you know he's not my type, she said, turning her head just slightly. Tyrone put the last forkful of chicken and French fries in his mouth and took a large gulp of 7-Up. As he chewed, he glanced at his watch. His last look, he told himself. He'd been in a restaurant for nearly an hour. The woman wasn't coming. Cody was right. On to the next one. He handed the waitress his money, put $1 next to his plate and headed for the door. It was only midnight. Traffic zoomed by, but as Tyrone walked down the block to his car, there were no other people on the street. The February night was cool and crisp. The sky was dark and clear, and the air around him was so peaceful that he almost felt safe. The city could do that sometimes, lull him into believing he had nothing to fear. But the Los Angeles he knew was full of surprises, of sudden winds, fire. The entire place could shudder and shake and destroy with no warning whatsoever. Tyrone looked around him, alert and wary. While the night hadn't been a total waste, he thought as he reached his car, at least he'd sell some more shirts. Tomorrow he would find out if there were any more festivals going on. He mentally calculated how many shirts he'd gotten rid of and how many more he had to sell to pay off the bill that would be due in less than 30 days. Deep in thought, he slid his key into the lock, unaware of the car that was pulling up behind him. He didn't hear the door open and shut or the clicking heels on the pavement. He turned around only when he heard, "Tyrone?" Esther Jackson smiled at him. "Oh, you're leaving," she said. He could tell that she felt a little embarrassed. He was really surprised that she'd come at all. What a beautiful mouth. "No," Tyrone said quickly. "I mean, are you hungry? We can go back inside." "Well, I am a little." When they sat down at a table inside, Esther's stomach began to flutter. She'd had 3 such nerve attacks on her way to Rick's, after increasingly dramatic and even histrionic urging from Vanessa, Paul and Bob. As she faced Tyrone, she wondered once again why she was here. Although the longer she sat opposite him, the more the flutters in her stomach subsided. "So," she said, "he had the roundest, clearest eyes she'd ever seen. Glad you made it. Didn't think you were coming." "Neither did I." "So I guess you got hungry," Esther said. Tyrone smacked his jaw with his hand in a playful manner. "Woman just dissed me." A young Latina waitress came and took Esther's order. She returned within 10 minutes with a plate of fried chicken wings, potato salad, biscuits, and a glass of orange juice. Esther picked up a wing with her fingers and chomped down on it. She chewed silently for a few moments, peering around the room. She was so intent upon her food that when she finally looked at him, she was surprised to see that Tyrone was laughing at her. "What's so funny?" she asked. "Girl, I see a whole different side of you." "What do you mean?" "I mean, when I see you at the bank in your little tight-fitting business suits, you are Ms. Corporate Jackson, and now here you are eating wings with your fingers at Rick's in the middle of the night. You're full of surprises." Esther's greasy lips glistened in the dim light of the restaurant. "I'm just a sister from the South Side." "Chicago?" She nodded. "Well, you're working out with that chicken. How do you do with ribs?" "I don't eat red meat." "Health conscious, huh?" "I don't eat red meat either. You only get one body, have to take care of it." "You sure do take care of yours." The compliment slid off her tongue before she could censor it. "Thank you." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "You're in very good shape yourself. I'm sure your date thought so." "My date?" "Oh," she laughed. The tiny mean streak in her told her to let him wonder, but Tyrone looked so genuinely troubled that she blurted out the truth. "It wasn't a date. Those guys were my girlfriend's buddies. They're gay." She saw that Tyrone looked strangely relieved. "I was wondering how I was going to break it to you." They both began laughing. "So now that I know that Bob and Paul aren't my competition, who is?" She had begun to feel comfortable sitting across from Tyrone, but his question put her on guard. She took a quick swig of orange juice, wiped her mouth with a paper napkin, and looked around for the waitress. She would pay her own bill. Tyrone put his hand lightly on her wrist. He could see her lips twitching nervously. "Am I getting ahead of myself?" he asked. She turned to him and was about to say, "Yes, you are." But Tyrone was no longer paying any attention to her. His eyes, round and bright with alarm, were focused on the door where two men were entering. His glance swallowed them whole. Young, Latinos, long hair, mean faces. Both were carrying guns. Tyrone felt his body tense up. "Just be cool," he said softly. "Just be cool. Don't panic, baby." He saw the fear welling up in her eyes, and he slid his hand across the table and grabbed her fingers. She could feel him pulling off her ring. He looked into her eyes. "It's going to be all right, girl," she nodded mutely. "This is stick up, everybody. Put your wallets and your jewelry on the table." The taller one yelled out. He spoke with a thick Spanish accent. "Don't try nothing and nobody won't get no hurt." Tyrone and Esther laid their wallets next to their plates and placed their watches beside them. Almost immediately, a gun was sticking in Esther's face, touching the tip of her nose. "You ain't got no gold necklace, no rings? Let me see your hands." One of the men demanded. Esther held her hands in front of her. They were shaking violently. She turned her face so that he could see she wasn't wearing a gold chain. "Take it easy," Tyrone whispered to her. "Everything will be okay." A low moan seeped through her throat. The man snarled something in Spanish and went to the next table. Esther turned as the shorter of the two guys scrambled behind the counter to get to the cash register. His voice blared through the silent restaurant. "Give me the fucking money," he screamed. Esther's head jerked involuntarily with every word. The clerk, a small black man with a boy's face, was too frightened to reply or even to open the cash register. The Latina waitress began whimpering and mumbling in Spanish. Tyrone looked at her. She was standing by their table and said very quietly, "Stay calm, just don't panic." He repeated the same soothing words over and over again. A tremendous wave of trembling rattled through Esther's body. She felt lightheaded and dizzy, as though she were about to faint. Be cool. Count from 500 backwards. It will be over within a few minutes," Tyrone whispered, taking her hand. She gripped his fingers tightly, too afraid to let go. She began counting. "Give me the fucking money." The thief's voice was louder and angrier. Esther watched in horror as he began shoving the clerk. There was a sudden loud popping noise. The black man screamed and his body fell to the floor with a heavy thud. Beside her, the Latina waitress began to sway. One of the men screamed angrily in Spanish at the other, who quickly snatched open the cashier's drawer and emptied the money into a paper bag. Both men ran out the door, then took off down the street on foot. Tyrone stood up. "You all right?" he asked her. Esther barely managed to nod weakly. The waitress was still shaking. Tyrone gave the thin brown woman's arm a tight squeeze before he rushed behind the counter where the clerk lay on the floor. The small black man was groaning as blood trickled from his arm. "Where's the phone, man?" Esther heard Tyrone ask. The police and the ambulance arrived together. The medics declared the clerk's wound superficial, but took him to hospital anyway. The officers questioned the other customers briefly and then turned their attention to Esther, Tyrone, and the waitress, who had begun to cry hysterically. Esther sat woodenly, trying to answer the police but unable to focus on their questions. As hard as she tried, she couldn't remember anything about the thieves, not how they looked, not what they were wearing, not even what they said. All she could recall was the dark steel shoved against her cheek, pressing her nose. When one of the officers asked her what the men had taken, she was silent for a long time, trying to picture exactly what was in her wallet. Finally, she shrugged. "I don't remember," she said. "She's kind of traumatized," Tyrone said. He took her hand in his. Tyrone, on the other hand, remembered everything. He gave the police detailed descriptions of both men, even including moles and facial scars. The entire time he was talking, he patted Esther's hand and sometimes rubbed her arm. One of the officers told them they could leave. Tyrone took Esther by the arm and walked her to the door. Still woozy with shock, she leaned against him for support as they stepped onto the street. The sirens had attracted a small crowd. "Hey, what happened?" an older man asked. "Robbery, man," Tyrone said testily. "They shot the cashier." "They kill him?" "No." "Used to be so easy living here," the man looked at Esther's distraught face, reached out and patted her shoulder. As he did so, she jumped. "Did you feel that?" she asked Tyrone. "What?" "I thought it was an earthquake." "You're just nervous," he said. "This place don't make no sense," the man said. When they got to their cars, Tyrone faced Esther and put his hands on her shoulders. "Look, you're still real shaky. I think I should follow you home. Where do you live?" Still in a daze, Esther told him her address, waited for him to get into his car, and then took off. Tyrone pulled up to the curb in front of Esther's house as she drove into her garage. He was expecting her to wave and for the automatic genie door to close, but instead she got out of her car and stood in the garage, waiting for him to join her. Would you come in, please? She asked when he was next to her. Her eyes were glazed with fear. Without taking off their jackets, they sat at the table in the breakfast room for a few minutes. He looked around. You want some coffee or tea or wine or something, he asked. Finally, yes. What? Peppermint tea. It's in the cabinet there, she said, pointing toward the kitchen. Tyrone went into the kitchen, and soon he returned to the breakfast room with 2 steaming mugs. Sugar and honey were in the centre of the table. You want something in your tea, he asked. Esther nodded her head. What, honey? Yes, she said softly, and Tyrone poured honey into her cup. They sipped the tea, not saying anything for a few minutes. When Tyrone looked... They sipped the tea, not saying anything for a few minutes. When Tyrone looked out the window, rain was beginning to fall, softly at first and then gradually harder. I'm still scared, she said. You're so calm. You act like stuff like this happens every day. He chuckled tersely. Baby, this is LA. Yeah, you're right. How much money did I take from you? She shrugged a little. Not much. Maybe $30. Any credit cards? No, I left them at home. That was lucky. How much did I get from you? Tyrone chuckled. $7? He held out his leg, pulled up his jeans, then reached into his sock and pulled out a wad of money. My daddy's from Mississippi, and he told me, son, when you go out partying, always put your money in the sock. So here's $200 that those fools didn't get. Oh, he said, reaching into his shirt pocket. This is for you. He placed her ring on her finger. Thank you. I didn't know what you were doing when you grabbed my finger like that. Thought I was kind of weird, huh? Esther smiled. As soon as I saw those guys, I knew what was going to go down. You live in LA, you have to be ready for anything. This must be the 4th or 5th robbery I've been involved in. Once, 2 guys held up my truck because they thought I was carrying money. Idiots. I'm like, does it say Brinks on this truck? I've walked in on robbers in my apartment. He shook his head and stood up. I'm going to go and let you get some sleep. I'll call you tomorrow. Maybe we can go out. She felt panic welling up inside her. Her fingers wrapped around Tyrone's wrist. He saw the fear in her eyes before she spoke. Would you just stay a little longer? He sat back down. When you said you were going to leave, I got scared. Her eyes were filled with tears. She didn't bother brushing them away. I could feel that gun. It touched my nose. He reached across the table and took her hands. It's okay. Quiet out. It's okay. She whimpered for a few moments, sounding more like a child than a grown woman. He wanted to hold her, but instead he tightened his grip on her hand. After a while, she stopped crying and sipped her tea. Are you hungry? You didn't get a chance to finish eating. She shook her head. Tyrone looked around the room they were in and out into the kitchen. It flashed across his mind that she probably owned her home. He was renting his duplex. In a secret place inside him, he felt the chill of intimidation, but he was too tired to give in to it. You have a nice house. I always liked this neighbourhood. You been here long? Less than a year, she said dully. Where's your VCR? You got any videos? They sat in the family room and watched Do the Right Thing and part of All About Eve until they began to doze, leaning into each other. You need to go to bed, he said. That same dark panic slowly filled her eyes. He hesitated. Are you still scared? Do you want me to walk you upstairs? She nodded. The hall light was on, so Esther didn't turn on the lamp inside her room. Fatigue and fear battled inside her. She and Tyrone stood at the edge of the door. Tell me what you want me to do, he said. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. You're shaking, Tyrone said softly. He pulled her to his chest and held her tightly, patting her back as if she were a small child. She felt safe. Finally, she said softly, could you just lie on the bed next to me? Tyrone sighed. For a fraction of a second, he thought she might be playing some sort of seduction game. But when he released her, the light from the hall eliminated the stark terror in her eyes. He took her hand and said, yeah, I could do that. She stretched out on the bed and he lay down beside her. She fell asleep within minutes. Esther woke with a start a few hours later, the memory of the gun nightmare fresh. When she sat up, her breathing came hard and fast. She gagged a little. In another minute she knew she'd be screaming. Then she'd heard the voice beside her, the strong, soft bass. I'm still here, he said. Right on, right on. That's the end of chapter 13. I'll stop there. Thank you for listening.